Hello everyone. Now we are going to discuss about the last part of our talk, that is application of remote sensing and GIS in environmental monitoring and management. In the first two parts, we have discussed about the basics of GIS, GPS, and the introduction of remote sensing approach. Now in the third part of our talk, we are going to see about the role and application of RS and GIS in environmental monitoring and management. So I am going to start with the term that is environmental management. It is very important to see the meaning of environmental management. Environmental management is generally concerned with the interaction of man with the environment. Okay, so it's a complex boundary where the biophysical and socio-cultural system interact. So this definition was given by Hare in 1970. And when we talk about the interaction of human with the environment, so it's a very complex phenomena. It's a very complex system. We need to study, we need to analyze the interaction mechanism between the environment and the human, or you can say the anthropogenic activities. Environmental management is also considered as an approach that goes beyond the natural resource management. And when we talk about the environmental management, it encompasses the political and social as well as the natural environment. It is an attempt, environmental management is an attempt to control the anthropogenic effects on the environment. It is used to control the impact of different anthropogenic activities on the environmental factors, on the interaction with the environment in order to preserve the natural resources. So basically the environmental management means we have to analyze the interaction mechanism between the environmental factors with the anthropogenic activities, as well as we should also work on the control of the negative impact of the human activities, anthropogenic activities on the environmental factors, environmental degradation. We should focus on the reduction of environmental degradation because of the anthropogenic activities. Okay, so environmental management is associated with different issues. It is a multidisciplinary approach. When we talk about the environmental management, it is associated with different issues, different branches of the science, like it is associated with the ecology, then earth science, atmospheric sciences, water science is also there, climate change is obviously most of the person around world, they are talking about the climate change. So environmental management is also associated with the climate change studies, society and culture. We should also incorporate different environmental laws and policy in environmental management, then assessment of environment, monitoring and mitigation of the negative consequences of the environmental degradation, management, waste management, and the sustainability. Okay, so environmental management is having multiple issues. We have to focus on these issues when we talk about the environmental management. For environmental management, we should adopt multidisciplinary approach. We should adopt interdisciplinary practices to work on the environmental management and monitoring. Okay, so these are some basic characteristics of environmental management. When we talk about the environmental management, it deals with the world that is affected by the human. It also supports different sustainable development practices. It demands a multidisciplinary approach. Okay, so because of the demand of multidisciplinary approach, it has to integrate different developmental points of the view, starting from the environmental factors should be there. There may be the economic factors, there may be the social factors. By integrating all these factors, we can work for the environmental management. Okay, it can also be applied for both long-term and short-term concern. Sometimes we need to focus on the long-term scenario. Sometimes we need to study the short-term scenario in case of climate change and sustainability. And also we should focus on the integration of natural and the social sciences. And also it is very important to see that policy making and planning strategies should also be integrated in the environmental management practices. Without policy making and planning, the environmental management activities cannot be implemented effectively to the social welfare and the benefit of the human. Okay, so these are some of the significance of environmental management. It is used to prevent and solve the environmental problems, to develop research and monitoring practices, to warn the threats and identify the opportunities. And the environmental management is also used to suggest different measures to resource conservation, natural resource management for long-term and short-term sustainable development goals. And also it helps to develop different strategies and mitigation planning to solve the environmental issues. So it is having a wider significance. When we talk about the environmental management, it is having a wider significance to solve any environmental problem, to work for the developmental activities, to suggest some precautionary measures, to work for the sustainable development, and to solve the environmental issues. Okay, so for environmental management, we should have different approaches. We have spatial approach, ecological approach, and environmental management system, EMS. These three approach combinedly can be used for the environmental management. I am going to discuss one by one about the spatial approach. The spatial approach can be applied at different scale. It can be applied on local scale, it can be applied on regional scale and the global scale. Depending on the need, depending on the requirement, we can apply a spatial approach for environmental management at local level, at the regional level, and the global level. Ecological approach having two components, conservation and preservation. Okay, when we talk about the ecological perspective of the environmental management, it should work on either the conservation planning or the preservation planning. Then environmental management system, we call it EMS. EMS has been defined by ISO 14001 as the part of the overall management system that includes different organizational structure, different planning activities, responsibilities, practices, procedures for developing, implementing, and reviewing the environmental policy. So environmental management system is generally the combined approach to process, to develop the process, to implement and achieve the environmental policies in terms of solving any real world problem, in terms of solving any environmental issue. Okay, so EMS is having four components. There are four elements of environmental management system that includes plan, do, check, and act. In planning, we can go for different planning policies, the objectives and the targets. Then in the do, we have to apply different procedures. We have to work on the training and communication between different organizations. Checking means we have to monitor our system. We have to monitor and audit our working phenomena. Then act is the management review and implementation corrective, that actions that will be used to improve the planning and management activities. Okay, so EMS is a kind of environmental management system. It helps to bring together different person, different people, different organizations, different planning and policies and review mechanism to manage any kind of environmental issue at any organizational level at different observational scale. Okay, so moving to the next slide, it also helps us to facilitate the environmental compliance. Okay, and the EMS also helps to address different issues related to the environmental impacts on the local population, impacts of the degraded environmental quality on the human population. And it also broadens the responsibilities to work together that can have significant impact on the environment. So these are some of the basic functions of the EMS. Okay, so framework for environmental management system includes ISO 14001 standard. We should also have the code of environmental management principles. There should be focus on the compliance, and also there may be the mechanism for eco management practices and the audit scheme that is very much useful for the environmental management. These all four framework, these all four components are used to create a effective framework for environmental management system that may be used for environmental monitoring and management. ISO 14001 is a family of standards related to the environmental management that exists to help organizations minimize how their operations negatively affect the environment. We can also comply the applicable laws, regulations, and other environmentally oriented requirements and continuity that helps to improve in the environmental management. These are some components of the ISO 14001 standard. It is having environmental policy, planning, implementation, and the operation. checking and the corrective action with the management review. So environmental policy, when we talk about environmental policy, it's a kind of a statement about any organization's position and values in terms of environment. Okay, for that we use ISO 14001 standard that states very clearly that an environmental policy is the organization's overall environmental performance in the expression by any top management. Okay, so we should focus on the environmental policy developed by the organization to solve, to manage the environmental issues. Environmental policy features, it is used to issued with a policy statement signed by facility manager. At a minimum, it commits to continual improvement, pollution prevention, environmental compliance, identifies the EMS framework, and it is very much it should be publicly available. Whatever the environmental policy is there, it should be publicly available for different users. Environmental planning is a process, it's a decision-making process, and it considers different social, political, and economic components. And also we should focus on the governance, so we can have effectively manage our environment. We can work for the effective environmental planning and management activities in present as well as in the future scenario. These are some important features of the environmental planning. It is helpful to identify the aspects and impacts from different activities, and also we should have the legal procedures. We should also adopt legal procedures for environmental planning. Sometimes we need to go for legal procedures to work for the environmental planning and management. And also we have to focus on the setting of different objectives and targets, and we should focus on the establishment of different EMS programs. Okay, so these are some of the scope of environmental management. So now I am going to discuss the application of RSGIS and GNSS, that is Global Positioning System, Global Navigation Satellite System, and other emerging technologies. So in combined way, we call all these technologies as a geospatial technology. Geospatial technology means the combination of remote sensing, GIS, GNSS, that we also call it as GPS, and the other emerging technologies including LiDAR, hyperspectral, and other things. Okay, so these are the importance of the geospatial information. Geospatial information or the data sets acquired from RSGIS is very much useful for identifying the abundance of natural resources, for the management and utilization of natural resources in a sustainable manner, for identifying the impacts of the natural resources on environmental health, for quick decision making and action, for implementation, and for planning and management strategies in terms of natural resource management and the planning. Okay, so whatever data sets, geospatial technologies we are having, these are geographical knowledge. So we can have the facility, we can apply these geographical knowledge to solve any real world problem by having inventory as well as some decision making approach that may be useful for the welfare of the human being, for the welfare of society. So, okay, so the decision making can be done through geospatial technology. When we talk about the geospatial technology, it helps us to make any decision. It helps us to work for the decision making process that is starting from the real world problem. Then we have some data sets. By processing and analyzing the geospatial data sets acquired from remote sensing, we can have very useful information, and by getting useful information, we can interpret this information to make any decision to solve any real world problem. So this is the entire decision making process that can be done using geospatial technology. Okay, so these are some application areas of geospatial techniques in natural resource management and monitoring. And we can also use GIS and remote sensing approach for topographical analysis, for making the topographical map of any study area that will have the elevation values, that will have the information about the slope and aspect. Contour mapping can be done using GIS, and hillside analysis can also be done using GIS and remote sensing approach. Natural resource management includes the assessment of different resources, different environmental factors. Change detection can be done to analyze and to monitor the changes, ongoing changes over the land surface. Suitability analysis can be done, and we can have we can have the option, we can have the facility to assess the impact. We can assess the negative consequences of the ongoing changes over the earth surface on the natural resources or the environment. So natural resource management application, it includes the water resource management, land use planning. We can also work for the soil erosion, evaluation of the soil erosion, watershed planning and management can be done. We can also work for the analysis of ecosystem services, conservation planning and strategies can be done for the forest inventory. We can analyze the risk related to any change related to the natural resource. Coastal zone management and hazard mapping can also be done using remote sensing and GIS. That is very much useful to monitor the changes for the conservation and planning for the environment and other natural resources. Disaster management and mitigation. Okay, when we talk about the remote sensing and GIS, so it helps us to mitigate and make proper planning in case of any disaster, in case of earthquake, in case of drought, forest fire. We may have temporal data sets, we may have spatial information by getting the information from GIS, by getting the information from remote sensing satellites, images from remote sensing satellites. We can easily monitor and track the ongoing changes in case of flooding, drought, or forest fire. We can also study the landslide zonation and erosion activities over the hilly area, hilly region. Okay, change detection. In case of flooding, we have the multi-temporal data sets. By getting the multi-temporal remote sensing images of pre-flood and post-flood, we can easily map the flooded area. We can easily monitor the area spreading of the flood. That is very much useful for mitigation and planning strategies. Okay, this is the image before flood and after flood. So you see the images of July 1 for pre-flood, and after flood, this post-flood, we are having the satellite images. So by having the multi-date satellite images, we can easily analyze the flooding. We can easily analyze the spreading of the flood. So we can work for the proper environmental planning and management, for mitigation strategies, for planning activities. Okay, radar remote sensing, that is an active remote sensing approach. Active remote sensing is already discussed with you, that it is also useful for identifying the flooded area if in case of bad weather condition. Okay, we can also prepare flood vulnerable zones using the GIS and remote sensing approach. We can categorize the entire flooded area into different zones with the low vulnerable zone, high vulnerable zone, or medium vulnerable zone for evacuation plan for the citizen, for the evacuation plan for the people living in that area. Okay, flood mapping can also be done. We can also develop 3D model. We can also visualize the flooded area in the 3D view for better visualization or for the better management of the flood. Okay, forestry. In case of forestry, geospatial technology, or we call it as remote sensing and GIS, that can be very much useful for forest management, for the development of forest information system. We can also work for the mapping and monitoring of ongoing changes over the forest area. And we can also analyze the encroachment by the anthropogenic activities. That is a very important part of environmental management, because forest is a very important component of our environment. So the encroachment in investigation means how much area is encroached by anthropogenic activities can be easily identified and can be detected by the remote sensing and GIS approach for getting different satellite images from different sensors, different satellites. We can also assess the forest fire. In case of forest fire, we can easily map the area affected by the forest fire. That can be used for the mitigation and planning strategies. Okay, so there are having wider application in biodiversity. In biodiversity conservation, habitat analysis can be done for different species, different animals using GIS and remote sensing. Deforestation studies can also be done. We can detect and monitor, we can map the areas that is affected by the deforestation. We can easily see the changes using multi-temporal remote sensing images and GIS approach. Okay, this is the forest cover in India. in 1972 to 75. And again, we can have the forest cover in India between the period of 1982 to 82. So we can have the option to track the changes. We can have the facility advantages of using remote sensing and GIS to monitor the ongoing changes, especially in case of forest. That is a very important component of our environment. Okay. We can also work for the recognition of different species. The distribution of species can also be done using remote sensing images. This remote sensing image is used to identify and to map different species. In case of forest, we can have different types of forest cover, deciduous forest, coniferous forest. Okay, different types of forest, different plant species can also be identified and mapped using the images acquired from the remote sensing remote sensing approach. Okay, forest fire information system can be developed using the data sets, using the remote sensing and GIS approach for better planning and mitigation strategies in case of forest fire event. So there are having wider application in forest. That is very important component of our environment. This is another case study that we have identified the forest fire, risk mapping and forest fire information system can be developed. Agriculture, remote sensing and GIS approach can be used for agricultural applications, including the crop acreage. We can also estimate the yield. Then we can analyze the soil moisture, having the active remote sensing data sets. We can also go for the mapping of suitable land cover maps. That is very much useful for agricultural practices, for planning and mitigation strategies. In case of any disease, we can also work for the mapping of forested area, or you can call it as a agricultural land. These agricultural land can be mapped, and in case of any disease, we can easily detect the areas of agriculture by having some disease, some insects. Okay, crop type mapping can be done. We can use remote sensing images to map different types of crop over the agricultural land, including the corn, lentil, mustard, barley, wheat. Different crop types can be mapped very easily using remote sensing images. Okay, geosciences, the application of remote sensing and GIS in geosciences, we can monitor the changes in the glacial area. We can easily analyze the change in the snout position in case of glaciers. You see in this image, this is the change in the snout position of the Gangotri Glacier at different time interval, starting from 1980 to 1971, then 2001. So by using multi-temporal images, by having multi-temporal data sets, we can easily monitor the ongoing changes over the glacier. That is very much important. That is very important factor of our hydrological system of the Earth. So it is wider application in geoscience. Mineral exploration can also be done using GIS and remote sensing. It can also be used for urban planning and developmental activities. By having remote sensing images, we can easily map, we can easily monitor the growth change. Then cadastral mapping can also be done using remote sensing. Land use, land cover mapping and change analysis can be done using remote sensing and GIS. That is very much important for sustainable land use planning. Dynamics of land use, land cover can also be identified, can also be analyzed using multi-temporal images, multi-temporal data sets. You see in this figure, we are having the images starting from 1974 to 2010, and you can see the dynamics of different land use, land cover categories. Urban information system can be developed using remote sensing images. This is the high resolution remote sensing images that can be used to develop urban information system for getting better detailed information about different urban features. Okay, land information system can be developed on the basis of cadastral mapping. High resolution satellite images can be used for developing the land information system. This is another example of the use of remote sensing images for getting the exact location of different land surface features, including the tree, the bridges, road, and different houses. Okay, this is a map. This is a spatial map that can be prepared using the GIS tools, GIS softwares. Okay. Remote sensing and GIS can also be used for urban utility services, management of different utility services in urban areas. Utility management can also be done using remote sensing and GIS with the creation of digital maps, including the electricity supply, gas pipeline, telecom, power supply, water utilities. That is very much important for providing basic information about decision support system. Okay. Now, remote sensing and GIS is very much useful for health related studies. We can use remote sensing and GIS for proper management of different infections, different diseases. Okay, disease control requires the understanding of the spatial distribution of the location of hotspot for a particular disease. So geography can provide some kind of information, but by having the remote sensing and GIS approach, we can have the location of highly infected areas that can be very much useful for mitigation and planning strategies. Okay, so in health GIS, or you can call it as the application of GIS in health related studies, we call it generally as a spatial analysis. These spatial analysis can assist in solving any medical problem related to any specific disease. That is very much useful for the health related studies, the impacts of environmental factors, environmental degradation on the human health, human population. Okay, this is the way how we can use remote sensing and GIS for mapping the disease affected areas. Okay, the GIS can do the integration of different types of data sets. We may integrate different types of spatial data sets with the non-spatial data sets, and by integrating multiple data sources, we can easily do any spatial analysis that can be done using GIS. GIS can be used to draw different maps. It is used to prepare different maps and also helps to visualize the distribution of the hotspot of any particular disease or any infection in the urban area. Okay, it can accurately measure the distances and the areas that is very much vulnerable to particular species, or you can say the particular disease or any other infections. Overlay analysis can also be done using different areas. We can also use internet GIS, means whatever the data we have collected, whatever the maps we have prepared, we can easily publish this map for the public, for the access by the public. That can be done using internet GIS or web GIS. Okay, so GIS applications in epidemiology means GIS can be used for data visualization and exploration, the integration of different data sources. We can easily monitor the spreading of any disease. Geostatistical analysis and modeling can be done for the forecasting of the any disease in near future. Spatial interaction and diffusion can be done using GIS, and also we can have the web-based services, web-based application of GIS for the data sharing, for the sharing of our maps throughout the internet with different users, different public, different local users. Okay, we can also visualize the data sets using 3D extension. Okay, data integration can be done. We can also have thematic structure, map overlay. We can compute new information, new research that can be used to integrate different risk factors to develop some risk models in health related studies. We can use buffer zones. We can use different map algebra, and also we are able to predict the likelihood of elevated blood lead levels based on the location of the residents. Okay, so temporal change of the malaria. Malaria is a disease, so we can have the multi-temporal data sets. By having multi-temporal data sets acquired from remote sensing approach, we may easily track the spreading of the malaria. Okay, so using the temporal change, we can see how much area will be affected by the malaria and how much area is affected within the period of 1 year or 2 year or 3 years. Okay, so temporal change of the malaria can be easily tracked using the remote sensing and GIS approach. We can have the temporal data sets in different months of the year, and we can see that how much area is highly affected by the malaria, and what is the rate of the spread, and what is the direction of the spread, in which direction the spread, that particular disease like malaria is spreading in different months. So that can be done using remote sensing and GIS. That is very much important for analyzing the impacts of particular disease on the human health. We can easily monitor the spreading of any disease, like the disease surveillance. Through this surveillance, we can have the picture of disease activity, and GIS can provide the data management and the visualization that can be disseminated in the real world time using the internet GIS. Okay, this is the way how we can publish, how we can share our spatial data, our data sets provided by the GIS approach over the internet, over the website. That can be done using web-based GIS activities, web-based GIS services. Okay, this is the number of current cases. This is a case study where we have the number of current cases of the SARS. That was a earlier infection disease. Okay, throughout the world. Okay, this is another example how we can investigate the dengue. Dengue can also be, as a case study, it was done in Peru. Then we have identified, in this case study, they have identified the hotspot area of dengue using the GIS and remote sensing approach. Okay, we can also model the dengue transmission by having different data sources, different environmental factors, different other health factors can be integrated using GIS approach to model the dengue transmission, to see how much area will be affected within few time. Means we can have the option to predict the future transmission of the dengue using the GIS and remote sensing approach. Okay, these are some other examples of the remote sensing and GIS that is currently under utilized. Okay, we are having remote sensing and GIS is having great potential in epidemiological research, communicable disease control, health service planning, and optimization. So we are having a lot of applications of remote sensing and GIS in health related studies also. Okay, we can also have the facility provided by GIS to locate different hospitals in a city. We can have the database showing how much hospitals are there in a city, so we can have the exact location and shortest path, shortest route from your house to the hospital. In case of emergency, you can use this networking, this transportation analysis, then transportation system for reaching to that hospital, nearest hospital. Okay, different services can be integrated as a need. Means you can have different options, you can have different data sources, and you have the hospital location of different hospitals that can be used for integrating the services that can be used in case of any emergency. Okay, this map is showing the record of the ambulance response, means in which area how much response rate of ambulance in case of any emergency. That can be done using GIS and remote sensing. These kind of maps, these kind of maps can be prepared, can be displayed using GIS and remote sensing approach. Okay, surface building and hotspot analysis can be done. Means you can easily identify, you can easily locate the areas with highly infection rate that can be categorized as a high hotspot zones, where there is a high rate of any particular disease or infection. Okay, so in summary, GIS can provide a spatial dimension to any epidemiological research and health related studies. It is used for many public health applications and services in case of effective allocation of the healthcare resources, equity in the accessibility to the services. We can also use internet GIS, or generally we call it as a web-based GIS, that can provide the public health information in real time. And it also helps to evaluate and to make any decision, to support decision-making process and emergency response. That can be very much useful for the public welfare and the for any urban area in any human population. So thank you very much for this lecture, for your kind listening of this lecture on the application of remote sensing and GIS in environmental monitoring and management. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.